of all manner of evil and wickedness. I mean, it's like in the political conversation, you would think bishops and church leaders are such evil people that this society would do better if there was absolutely not a single church and not a single bishop. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, if you push something, you know, an accusation can be valid to some extent, but if you push it to the extreme end, what would that mean? Would we mean we shut down the church, the Anglican church, shut down the PCA church, shut down all the Pentecostal churches? I can't see a society that can function without the existence of the church as it is. So I don't think anybody wishing the church away is going to succeed. So I think I can guarantee, if I jump into that conversation, that the church is not going away. And those people who actually think they can silence the church, history is not on their side. And if you want us to go to the history, we can talk about it.
Yeah. The Mutava Musyimi-led team, I am made to understand they did some research, and that meant traveling in some other countries just to look at how those countries manage their religious organizations.
Yes.
And one of the countries they visited was the US. And the US has an interesting model that is very different from what is being proposed here. The US does not actually infringe on religious freedoms to that extent, where they have commissions that they just basically separate religion and the law. If you break the law, you break the law, whether you're practicing a practitioner of any religion or not.
Yes.
When you break the law, you break the law. Whether we're talking about terrorism, which is an extremism we have seen with some elements within religious organizations, whether we're talking about the Shakahola incidents, those extremisms where those are really excesses that have to be checked, and they can be checked according to the law. So I think the question I'm asking is, why do you, what logic is there that the Mutava Musyimi-led team did not consider, for example, the US approach, but rather took on another approach where now there is a proposal to have a religious registrar, a registrar of religion, an office that will be domiciled at Belief Sharia House, and with a registrar commissioner at the top, calling shots on how religious organizations will function. And on top of that, there is a proposal to have umbrella bodies, umbrella religious organizations that will somehow self-regulate. So they envisage a hybrid system where we have the registrar sitting at Sharia House, and then we have umbrella bodies, so that it looks like we are trying to, it's not the government regulating the church. We've also roped in some of their leaders to help them to self-regulate. Why is it that they took that approach? Well, we know even the proposal of the religious organizations having to form umbrella bodies will still be answerable to the registrar of the religious or religious societies.
I think if we were to summarize some of the major proposals, I think both the Mutava Musyimi, for example, task force output, whatever was drafted, there is this is anchored on the idea that yes, church needs to be regulated. Yes. Currently, of course, churches are registered, as societies, and there is a current registrar. I happen to visit that office every once a year, to present papers for our church organization. So I'm very familiar with the details and the forms and what happens, and really the kind of information they require. Very basic information. And it's very easy to file those papers every year. The fees are marginal. It's not a big deal. All right. So I can assure people who actually need to file those papers, it's really nothing to worry about, because all they need you is to maintain your file and provide information. If you change officials, then you just update the records, and you pay a small marginal fee for maintaining your file. So we have an existing framework that is quite straightforward, and it doesn't make any extraneous demand on the church. But the proposed bill, my problem with this bill is wherever they picked it up. 1st of all, if we were to look at the American model,
Yes.
American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the American model, if we were to look at the Ameri when the American Republic, and this is where now I go, I go all the way, laying out the historical and some of the some of the governance systems. When the Americans were forming their republic, first of all, America was 13 different colonies, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and others, all right? And I'm not an expert in American history, but at least we know those basic structures. So when the Americans came together and decided to form a republic,
yes,
and they could have formed an empire, but they decided, no, we weren't going to form a republic. We're not going to be like our brothers, the British, our imperial overlords, will form a free republic. One of the things that came up was the issue of each of the various colonies had certain denominational outlook that was different. So there was, at the beginning of the American Republic, a concern about what do we do about, do we create a state religion, or do we let the various colonies and their religious leaning, actually it was not so much, they were all Christians, most of them were Christian denominations, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, and the Puritans and all that, right? Yeah. So they agreed that they will have a separation of church and state in the sense, and again that is a term that is usually misunderstood. They said, look, we will be governed by a constitution. Okay? This constitution will lay out a framework where all men are created equal and endowed with rights and liberties, freedoms, basic freedoms, all right? Life, liberty, and I think freedom, whatever it is. I can't remember the framing exactly, but it's in the American Constitution. Yeah. So later on, there was the issue of what do we do with the religious, formulations and formations and all that. They said, no. We will not require to be an American to function as a member of the Republic that you have any religious affiliation, or we will not promote any one sector or sect. So anti-sectarianism. So they're concerned we don't want to put any sect above any other. So the American established that very clear, that there's a clear, whatever sectarian side of things you are, it does not matter. You are an American free citizen to operate in this republic, and you can go about your business without let or hindrance. So I don't understand how the Musemi Commission, when they pulled some of the models there, then they thought that they are going to create a legal structure and this legislative framework that will require churches to be regulated by a state organ. Yeah. So I really don't understand. Yeah. So because that governments tend to encroach on freedom, government by nature, they tend to extend their power over time. Yeah. There is always temptation for tyranny. I mean, today, if you listen, my brother, Apostle Wesley, everybody is complaining about the current regime and claiming, and I would say very clearly, claiming that this is a dictatorship. Okay? Yeah. Now, I know it isn't. I mean, I think I've read enough politics, and I know we don't have a dictatorship. The current government was elected publicly, and we had an election. Now, whether it was properly conducted or not, that's a story for another day. Yeah. But I know the current leaders were properly elected, or they were elected, or we made an attempt at electing them. So we don't have a dictatorship. But you see, whenever government encroaches on personal freedoms, basic freedoms, people actually feel that we are edging towards tyranny. Yeah. All right? So, and there's always a danger. Freedom, by the way, freedom, and the religious freedom in particular, which is one of the most fundamental freedoms, there is always a danger of that freedom, the government crowing back on allowing religious freedom. So I think the danger in creating, and by the way, whatever the commission proposed, they seem to have even actually looked at the matatu industry.
Yeah, just hold that thought, sir. I know, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very important conversation. It involves you, whether you are a pastor or not. as long as you're born again, you're a member of the clergy, or you belong to a particular religious group. This is a conversation that is important for you to listen in and understand. Please ask questions if you have any. We're going to go for a short break, but we're coming back with Pastor Gigi in a few minutes.
Nairobi, are you ready to light up the city? City Lighters Church proudly presents Street Praise Pop-Up Light Up Nairobi Edition. Join us on the 29th of September 2024 from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. at Aga Khan Walk, Nairobi CBD, featuring powerful worship from City Lighters Worship, Life Church Limuru Worship Team, DC Umoja Worship Team, Karura Voices, Andringelelo, and Ruwak Worship. It's more than just an event. It's a movement. Let's come together as one city, one voice to praise, worship, pray, and light up Nairobi. Mark your calendars. Entry is free.
Welcome back. I believe you haven't gone anywhere. We're just wondering here with my good guest for today how time really flies. We've not even handled the specifics, but I'm trusting God that we'll be able to look at a few things that we feel are a concern, and that nobody should sit back and think, oh, now the rogue pastors are being put in check. No, you have something else coming. Pastor Gigi, the state organ that is being proposed to regulate religious organizations domiciled at Sharia House will exercise its authority through the county governments, and so we'll have county government officials inspecting, going down to check on religious organizations. Churches,
supervising elections,
supervising the elections,
church elections,
requiring the audits of finances, requiring to see the qualifications of the leaders, whether the pastors there have a diploma, certificate, or a degree in theology or not. Now, what's the danger of that? Because for me, that's a real problem right there.
Absolutely, and I think it's full-handed, because you cannot regulate the church the way you regulate a SACCO society.
Yes.
That is exactly the model that the SACCO uses. The SACCO, the Ministry of Cooperative at the headquarters have state officers, national state officers. But the action and the implementation and the regulation is actually implemented by the county government. Each county government has a SACCO, and this is a kind of a marriage between the county government and the Ministry of Cooperative.
Yes.
They appear in the SACCO's election day and supervise that election. Now, anybody imagining that should be done for the church actually is really stepping too far.
Yeah.
And maybe for our viewers, I can give them an overview, a very
Yes.
quick overview. This is the Mugatana
Yes, the
draft bill.
yes.
We are calling it Mugatana. It's not exactly written Mugatana here. It's bill for introduction into the Senate, the Religious Organization Bill to 2024.
Yeah.
And I was looking at the general outline of the areas. So first of all, this bill, the drafted bill, now that you've raised that issue, the drafted bill, first of all, the Mugatana bill, does not look like Hon Musimi's task force bill. They are two different animals.
Yeah, it's good to make that distinction.
It's very, very important to make that distinction.
Yeah.
This particular bill, the Mugatana bill, right off the bat proposes Office of Registrar of Religious Organizations.
Yes.
So similar to what we currently have. And then appointment of the registrar, and it proposes somebody with a theology degree to serve in that office, etc., etc. So now, of course, you know, even the Muslims have theology. Theology is not a preserve of the Christian church. So even among the Muslims, they have theology. Well, yes, theology being
Study about God.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
So a Muslim cleric with a master's degree or PhD in religious Islamic religious studies, I think, could serve in that thing, unless they say that, because it is all the religious organizations. So why should Muslims be left out of that particular office? They stand, on equal terms with every other person.
And that goes for every other, even that Kaya elder.
Oh yes, the Kaya elder
As long as they have training.
But then there are some professors who are actually bona fide Kaya elders.
Yes,
and Kikuyu elders for that matter.
Absolutely.
So there's, and maybe they are even in some of the theological schools here in our republic. So that's a problem. The other problem is that then it goes all the way, very ambiguous about these umbrella bodies, the registration, and then management of umbrella bodies, management of religious organizations, incomes and returns, miscellaneous. In fact, on the point you are asking about managing the religious organizations and the county, the role of the county, what this bill is proposing is that at the county level, the registrar will have officers, who report to the registrar, and their work is to ensure that the religious organizations within the counties are actually complying with the law. All right. So, and where an inspection is required, which might, I think it's proposing an annual inspection or the inspection at the inception of the religious organization, that county officer will show up. So that's just opening a can of conflict, because if I belong to some of the conservative branch of the Christian church, and some Pentecostal, fire-breathing, tongue-talking, saliva spitting, religious group that has taken over our county, or even some of the other, honestly religious organizations that have uniforms, and sometimes they worship under trees, and then they march in the street early in the morning in their white uniforms. And here is a county officer, being told, you need to check on those guys, what they are up to. That will create trouble.
Absolutely.
Yes. So that's the warning I would say. So the church is actually at the risk of state encroachment into their freedoms.
Yeah.
I would rather a religious organization or a religious church or whatever it is under a tree, playing the drums and doing whatever they are doing without hindrance, because that is their fundamental right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think maybe we haven't really talked about it, but I think you just alluded to the issue of freedoms.
Yes.
And one of the major freedoms is freedom of religion.
Yes.
And even in trying to understand, as envisaged in the Constitution, 2010 Constitution, the freedom of religion that each one of us has, how will these state organs, or this particular state organ, prevent itself from violating my religious freedoms, or the religious freedoms of a particular grouping or organization? That for me is the other issue. In its pursuit to regulate and ensure that we are, in accordance with the law, how then do they prevent themselves from doing that? I think that's a danger.
The temptation is laid out very clearly, Apostle Wesley, and I will read it for you.
Yeah.
The temptation for the government to overreach is very clearly laid out in the Management of Religious Organizations, Part 4 of the current proposed bill.
Yeah.
And in particular, in the section talking about, I think I need to check that clearly, where there is, miscellaneous,
Yeah.
there's a section talking about the miscellaneous provisions where this whole thing goes ballistic in terms of some of the things they'll be checking out.
I think I found it.
Yes.
The part 7,
Yes.
miscellaneous,
Yeah.
that is 34.1.
Yes.
A person shall not,
Yes.
A, convert or attempt to recruit into their religion, or convert any person from one religion to another by misrepresentation, force, undue influence, or coercion. Okay?
Even if you hold just that,
Yes.
just that line, that single line is basically saying, look, Wesley, you cannot hold a crusade. Because all you need is someone to go to court and say, this is coercion,
Yeah.
this is misrepresentation.
Yeah.
Or
This is undue influence.
this is undue influence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they go to court and get a court order, and your crusade will be stopped.
Listen to B. It says, recruit, convert, or attempt to convert a child from one religion to another without the consent of their parent or guardian. And I want to assume here when they say child, they mean anyone from 0 to 18 within the Kenyan context.
That means you're basically going to shut down Christian schools.
Or even high school missions, for example.
Yeah.
Primary school
No.
missions.
Look, if you have a kindergarten, a Christian kindergarten, and you teach Bible, and these are 3-year-olds, right off what they call it, the day school or whatever. That can be construed as an attempt at conversion of children without their parents' consent. Of course, the other side of it is, okay, fine. You will get the parent to sign off when they are signing into the school at the beginning of the term, or when they are signing up to allow, so they are signing up to a religious sponsored school.
Yeah.
But you see, you are adding a burden, but you will not really be able to achieve the aims.
Yeah.
This thing is impossible to implement. That is literally policing what a teacher can open their mouth and say to a child.
In fact, there's a specific D. That same provision, 34D, says, you shall not offer religious teachings to a child without the consent of their parent or the guardian. So that's specifically,
Yeah. That is exactly the
dealing
point.
with what you're talking about.
Yes.
And then it goes on with so many other provisions there. And basically, when I look at this miscellaneous 34, Article 34 there, and on all these provisions, I see an attack against open-air meetings, or what we call crusades, whether we're talking about person-to-person evangelism. I see an attack on high school missions, primary school missions, the way you have preachers. If traditionally in our schools where we, in Kenya, we'd had pastors coming in every once a week or every so often to share the gospel.
Or even prayers during the exams,
Yes.
you remember,
Yes.
yeah. So basically, I think while Kenyans were not watching, I keep repeating that statement, while the church is not watching, somebody is actually at the Senate, presenting a bill in Senate that basically cuts off the church, the voice of the church.
Yeah.
And that is a basic infringement on religious freedoms. Because as far as I know, if we're going to run a real proper republic, we must allow the freedom of speech and the freedoms for argumentation and presentation of ideas. A society thrives when people can talk together. when ideas can be shared out in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Good and bad ideas. Okay? So I don't have a problem with the Shakahora preacher doing a sermon. Let people listen to that sermon and say, oh yeah, this guy is misquoting the Bible.
Yes.
This guy is misleading people. He's misrepresenting the Bible.
Yeah.
And it is very easy for anyone to tell. Kenyans are so religious. The Kenyan society, even the political class, they are so Christian. The last time I checked, Bwana Sifiwe is one of the most popular phrases among our politicians in this country. So we really don't have a shortage of people who understand the basic Christian ethos and doctrine. So we can tell if a preacher stands up and misleads the Kenyans, whether in a public crusade or whatever. So the Kenyans are not in danger of being misled by a preacher. That's not the case. That's not. So we are solving a problem that does not exist.
Yeah.
Yes. And in my academic study, one of the things Apostle Wesley you cannot get away with, if you sit before a panel of professors trying to defend an idea, the first thing they grill you down on, what's your problem? What's the problem statement?
Yeah.
What exactly is the reason? What justifies your research?
Yes.
What problem are you setting out? If you cannot tell what problem you are solving, you don't have a problem, is a red herring. So I see a bill that does not have a problem, is a bill looking for a problem to solve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And looking at those potential for excesses, and especially from the government side, any person that is passionate about evangelism and mission work and church work and the practice of the Christian faith really should be very, very concerned. Let's look at the other issue that is a serious proposal here. And this has been a conversation for a long time. The qualification of religious leaders or the members of the clergy, that any person propagating the gospel must be qualified through training. Either they must have a diploma in theological study or a degree in theological studies. Now, Pastor Gigi, and I know this is not to overemphasize the issue. My question is, this law is assuming that every religious leader or every clergy, first of all, is literate enough to understand, to sit in a class. That's the assumption.
Yes.
Number two is also assuming that every clergy has access to institutions of theological training. It is also assuming that every member of the clergy that has been trained and has a theological degree is therefore qualified to be a pastor or to be a member of the clergy. All those assumptions, really.
They are assumptions.
Yeah, because you and I know that most of the preachers that, first brought the gospel to us in our younger years had no clue on what theological training is.
And I think Wesley, we need to say this very clearly.
Yes.
The gospel has been propagated by lay people.
Yes.
So it is the layman, and I like, it's the Anglicans. Let me mention them. The Anglicans are the ones who have this kind of framework. The Protestant movement, really, we owe it a lot. Almost even our very language that we use, we owe it to the Protestant movement that was actually birthed by no other than Martin Luther in the 1500s. So, Apostle Wesley, my problem is people assuming, that the gospel is best driven by elite clergy.
Yeah.
That is not correct. Even the disciples, and I don't want to fall into the trap of, the disciples who are uneducated and therefore, we defend lack of education and religious scholarship.
Yes.
That's not my point. And I think I'm a defender of theological education and religious scholarship.
Absolutely.
And by the way, this world has benefited tremendously from the wisdom and the excellence of the most scholarly people were always religious people. So this, the last 500 years have been transformative. And Martin Luther, by the way, if we go back to the 1500, the Reformation, the basic Reformation.
Yes.
The Reformation was a protest against the dominance of a select group of clergy who had both the power in terms of education and in terms of determining how things go. You understand? So Luther was opening up the Bible, and he made it possible for everyone, even the peasant boy, to read and understand the Bible for themselves. And the world has transformed. The West transformed because the Bible came into the homes of people. So people read the Bible in their homes, they read the Psalms, they sing them. So the present world, as we know it right now, has benefited from the fact that every single person can read the Bible for themselves.
Absolutely.
So there's no monopoly of the knowledge of the Bible. It makes absolutely no sense. We'll be reversing the clock actually by insisting only a certified preacher can stand up and read the Bible and teach people God's word. And
Pastor Gigi, the other assumption is that academically qualified clergy, member of the clergy, cannot pull a shakahola.
Oh, he can. And in fact, he's even better off prepared.
And I think we're also ignorant of the fact that some of the most controversial cultic leaders and charismatic leaders are very highly educated. And some of them are very, serious theological training.
Yes.
And yet, because this is a spiritual problem, not necessarily an academic problem.
Yeah, so you're trying to solve a problem, wrong solution for the wrong problem. So that's that's my concern. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't really promote that idea of basic theological training. I think that's very much in order. That registration is very easy to fulfill, by the way. Because I know almost every denomination I know in this country has some form of religious education program certificate. In fact, they require only a certificate, which is very easy. 6 months down the line, you have a piece of paper and you have some basic training, and including an exam and certification. Anybody who can read and write can achieve that certificate. So the church will not be at all disempowered by that demand. So I think that's the other thing to reassure the church, that it's a very easy bar to reach. So that's a good news. So we can say we don't want even to fight about that. So we can leave that. But beginning to monitor what somebody can open their mouth and say, and who they can say it to, and deciding that this person is underage, you cannot preach to them, you cannot read to them the Bible, you are threatening to convert them, you are coercing them, because these are things that are very difficult. If you went to court today accused of coercion, what exactly is that crime? What kind of a crime is that?
Because has it been defined? And that's a question.
Exactly.
Because some of these terms are very huge, ambiguous, and misrepresentation. What constitutes misrepresentation?
Yes.
What constitutes undue influence?
Exactly.
What constitutes coercion, as it were?
Exactly.
Or what constitutes force?
Yes.
Because if someone says, I was trying to force them to convert,
yes,
what would constitute force? And I think for me, when those things are left without definitions and clear parameters that define what that is, then it leaves a lot of room for abuse and misuse.
Actually, so everybody's suspicion is correct. This bill is actually is an attempt at marshalling the church. So and I think we have explained the details.
Yes.
How that is coming about, because you have ambiguous clauses, ambiguous provisions, something that cannot actually be registered. It cannot be implemented. It is impossible to implement the bill as it is. And if you have to implement it, you have to run a tyranny. I get to determine whether you are misrepresenting yourself. I get to determine. So when you give too much power to a state organ, that's the beginning of tyranny.
Yeah, and I think so that we're not accused of throwing the baby with the bathwater. What in this bill do you think is a good? What are the good provisions? Because we're not saying the entire thing is bad. We're just saying that there are elements of this thing that we must revisit. We must sit down and have a conversation on. Do you feel, having looked at this proposed bill, that there are some elements in it that are actually good for religious organizations and the church?
I can say that. Number one, I think establishing the office of a registrar specifically for religious organizations, apart from other social societies, I think that's a good thing. All right, because it means that now we can have a more friendly. I will make those assumptions, right? And so I am not against the idea of churches registering and forming frameworks, and it's actually helpful for the church, so that then if someone is actually unhappy about a certain religious organization that has been registered, they can go and legally be able to raise an objection. They have a legal ground for objecting to the establishment of a certain religious organization. You understand? And they can question even their doctrine and stuff like that, and they can take it to court. Say, this is the constitution they have put out, this is the doctrine they have put out, but this is the doctrine of the Bible. We think there is inconsistency, and that matter can be prosecuted. So I think there is some level of, there is something good in that. There's a canon, a lot of good things in that. Now, the idea of perhaps registering umbrella bodies, that's fine with me. So it kind of gives a legal standing for some of those organizations, so that then when they exercise oversight of the members that are registered under the umbrella body, there is a legal basis for that. All right. So those are some of the provisions that I find interesting. I don't know why Mungatana Bill ignores completely the idea of a commission, which was proposed by the Musimi Commission. Because I thought that would be a very good, plus a tribunal, a dispute tribunal. That's coming from Musimi Commission. So Mungatana Bill, let's be very clear, it has no provision for a tribunal or a commission, a religious commission, with the religious organizations coming together and governing themselves. So I still am not quite satisfied with the governance proposal of the current bill that is being laid out in the state, in the Senate. So that's the problem. So by and large, perhaps it will separate the old, because what we have, the current constitution, the legal framework we have is a very old 1965, I think 68, Registrar of Societies Act. Well, perhaps it misses a few things, and it has not defined some of these institutions. So there is need for definition, so that some of these institutions are properly defined. So while the bill is in the House or during the discussions and public participation, I think the church also need to wake up and get into the debate. There's no standing by the wayside, but we have to get engaged so that then we ensure everything is clearly defined. And when things are defined, it's easier. So the church can push back and say, look, the law says this, so you cannot claim this. You understand? So we need, it's good to have a framework. How it will work, only time will tell.
Okay.
Yes.
In a few minutes, because our time is really flying, let's make a case for self-regulation. First of all, do you believe the church can self-regulate without necessarily the intervention of state organs? Do you believe that the church, the body of Christ consisted today, the religious leaders and organizations, umbrella bodies that exist today, do they have the capacity to self-regulate?
I think the word, once you throw in the word regulation, so you are obviously assuming, and I'm being philosophical a bit, but the reason I'm being that is because I don't like the idea of making a demand that the church should self-regulate. Self-regulate against what? So first of all, the premise is that the church is actually just all over the place, and causing chaos. So, however, if we accept, the church has its own excesses and therefore a need to regulate, as long as that's what we are talking about, just staying within its lane, so to speak, in the normal parlor, staying within a lane and serving only its mandate, yes, there is need for that. Right? So there is need for that, the church actually just to play within its mandate, perhaps not to get too entangled in political activation, because, you defranchise the body. If you're playing both games, you're a politician, and a clergy at the same time. Although I know there is provision, and I really think that we need to allow those people who come out of the clergy, if you resign, after you retire, for example, if an Anglican bishop retires and wants to become a senator, perfectly in order. He's a Kenyan, like any other person. So there is no provision, and there should be no provision that someone who has served as a member of the clergy cannot become a politician. That line, there is nothing like that. That's is against the citizenship. So regulation, yes, but that needs to be a little bit more defined and clearer, so that then we don't just say, oh, the church needs to self-regulate. And you know what? The church is just all over the place. They are just muddling and, throwing things. Because you actually assume that the church is causing more harm than good, which is actually not correct.
Which is a false premise as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Pastor Gigi. Our time is up. It has run so fast. And I know we have looked at these issues on a very, from a bird's eye view, really. We haven't really got into the cracks of the matter to discuss details and to understand them from a legal perspective, obviously, because we're not lawyers. But we're trying to understand it from a layman's perspective as members of the clergy, as Christians in this country, so that we don't have a law that begins to infringe on religious freedoms and affect the propagation of the gospel in this country. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am truly grateful for your patronage. I appreciate all of you that have been here watching with us. God truly bless you for being faithful in terms of just watching this Friday morning Daddy show. My name is Apostle John Wesley. I've been in studio with Pastor Gigi, a good friend and a member of the clergy as well, and we are excited to have had this conversation together with you. The Lord truly bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Remember how we say it. Go to church on Sunday. Please go to church on Sunday. Let's keep the conversations alive. I believe that those that need to hear this have heard it, and the church is speaking, and it will continue to speak. Shalom.